It was the first day of summer vacation, and the streets of Maplewood were quiet. Most of the kids Alex's age were already packing their bags, ready for trips to the beach or the mountains. But Alex wasn't going anywhere. He sat by the window watching as the Miller family's car pulled out of the driveway, their kids laughing and waving as they sped off for their annual camping trip. Alex sighed and rested his chin on his hand. He had no trip, no vacation, and most of all, no one to go with. Alex lived with his grandmother, Mrs. Collins, in a small, white house at the end of Oak Street. The house was old, with creaky floors and a garden that his grandmother loved to tend to. But Alex often found himself feeling like the walls were closing in on him, especially during summer. His grandmother was kind and always baked cookies for him, but Alex knew she couldn't replace the one person he longed to meet, his mother. Alex's mother had left when he was just a baby. For the first few years, she would send him letters, telling him stories about where she was living and how much she missed him. The letters came less and less often as the years went by, until one day they just stopped. Alex kept every letter she had sent in a shoebox under his bed. He'd read them over and over, trying to imagine her voice, her face, her laugh. But she was just a blur in his memory, someone who existed only in words on a page. One day, while cleaning out the attic with his grandmother, Alex found something he hadn't seen before, an old photograph tucked inside a dusty book. It was of a young woman standing in front of a large building with a sign he couldn't read. She was smiling brightly, her arms spread wide like she was about to embrace the world. Alex stared at the picture for a long time. He knew deep down that this woman was his mother. The same eyes, the same smile his grandmother always said they shared. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and sadness. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft orange, Alex sat at the kitchen table, the photo clutched tightly in his hand. His grandmother was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. "Grandma," Alex said quietly. His grandmother turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it, dear?" Alex hesitated, his fingers tracing the edges of the photograph. "I want to find her. I want to find Mom." Mrs. Collins stopped stirring the soup. The air in the kitchen felt heavy. She walked over to the table and sat down across from Alex, her face soft with concern. "I know you do, Alex," she said gently. "But finding her, it might not be as simple as you think." "I don't care," Alex replied, his voice trembling with a mix of determination and fear. "I need to know where she is. I need to know why she stopped writing." His grandmother sighed deeply, her hands resting on the table. "Your mother. She had a difficult life, Alex. She made choices that weren't always easy. But that doesn't mean she didn't love you." Alex's eyes were fixed on the photo. "Then why did she leave? Why didn't she come back for me?" Mrs. Collins didn't have an answer. She reached out and placed her hand on top of Alex's, her touch warm and comforting. "Sometimes people leave because they think it's best. But if this is something you need to do, to find peace, then I won't stop you." Alex looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Really?" His grandmother nodded slowly. "But you can't go alone. It's a big world out there, and you're just a boy." Alex's heart sank a little. He knew what that meant. He wouldn't be allowed to go without someone to watch over him. "But who would take me?" For a moment, Mrs. Collins didn't answer. Then, with a hint of reluctance in her voice, she said, "I think I know someone. He's not exactly the best travel companion, but he might just be the person you need." Alex raised an eyebrow, confused. "Who?" "Mr. Tom," she said simply. Alex's mouth fell open. "Mr. Tom? The guy who never smiles and is always sitting on his porch yelling at the neighbors?" Mrs. Collins chuckled softly. "Yes, that Mr. Tom. He may seem gruff, but he's traveled a lot in his life. And I think, deep down, he's got a good heart. He just doesn't show it often." Alex wasn't convinced. Mr. Tom lived next door, a middle-aged man who always wore the same old hat and never seemed to be in a good mood. He'd once scared Alex by chasing him away from his front lawn, yelling about kids and their noise. "But why him?" Alex asked, still unsure. "Because he owes me a favor," Mrs. Collins said with a wink. "And because you'll need someone who won't give up easily." Alex sat quietly, thinking it over. Mr. Tom wasn't who he had in mind for this kind of adventure. But if it meant he could find his mother, maybe he could deal with him for a while. "Okay," Alex said finally. "I'll go with Mr. Tom." His grandmother smiled, her eyes warm with pride and concern. "Then I'll talk to him tomorrow." As Alex went to bed that night, the photo of his mother resting under his pillow, he felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. Tomorrow, he would be one step closer to finding her. And even if Mr. Tom wasn't the companion he had hoped for, Alex knew that this summer would be different from any other. The next morning, Alex woke up early, his heart racing with excitement and a bit of fear. Today was the day. He rushed downstairs to find his grandmother, already on the phone, her voice low and serious as she talked to someone on the other end. Alex knew it had to be Mr. Tom. He hovered in the kitchen door, listening as she tried to convince him. "I know it's a lot to ask, Tom," she said, "but you owe me for that time I helped you fix up your old car, remember? And besides, you could use the fresh air." Alex couldn't hear Mr. Tom's response, but judging by the look on his grandmother's face, he wasn't too happy about the idea. After a few more minutes of back and forth, she finally hung up and turned to Alex with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He'll do it," she said, though there was a note of hesitation in her voice. "Really?" Alex asked, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. "He's not thrilled about it, but I managed to convince him. He'll be over in an hour, so you'd better get your things packed." Alex nodded and hurried back upstairs, grabbing a backpack and stuffing it with the essentials. A couple of t-shirts, some snacks, a notebook, and of course the old photograph of his mother. He wasn't sure what else to bring, so he kept it light, hoping that would make the trip faster. Exactly 1 hour later, there was a knock at the door. Alex's stomach flipped as his grandmother opened it to reveal Mr. Tom standing on the porch, looking exactly as Alex remembered him, grumpy, with his old hat pulled low over his eyes, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Morning," Mr. Tom grunted, not making any effort to sound cheerful. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against metal. He glanced down at Alex with a slight frown, then back at Mrs. Collins. "So we're really doing this, huh?" Mrs. Collins smiled politely, handing Mr. Tom a small envelope. "Yes, and here's a little something for your trouble." Alex watched as Mr. Tom pocketed the envelope without even looking inside. It was clear he was only agreeing to this for the money. Alex felt a wave of disappointment wash over him, but he pushed it aside. He didn't need Mr. Tom to care. He just needed him to drive. "Let's get this over with," Mr. Tom muttered, turning and heading back to his old pickup truck, a rusty blue beast that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. Alex exchanged a glance with his grandmother, who gave him a reassuring nod. "You'll be fine, dear. Just remember why you're doing this." Taking a deep breath, Alex followed Mr. Tom to the truck. As he climbed into the passenger seat, he was hit with the strong smell of stale cigarettes and gasoline. Mr. Tom didn't say a word as he started the engine, which roared to life with a loud, sputtering cough. Without another glance at Mrs. Collins, they were off, driving down the narrow, winding roads of Maplewood. For the first 20 minutes, they drove in complete silence. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional squeak of the truck's old suspension. Alex kept his eyes on the road ahead, clutching his backpack tightly on his lap. He wanted to ask Mr. Tom something, anything to break the silence, but the man's stern expression and furrowed brow made him think twice. Finally, it was Mr. Tom who spoke first, his voice cutting through the quiet like a dull knife. "You really think you're going to find her?" he asked, his tone flat and uninterested. Alex hesitated before answering. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have to try." Mr. Tom snorted, shaking his head slightly. "Kids always think the world's a big adventure, like some kind of fairy tale. Life's not like that, kid. It's messy. People leave, and sometimes they don't come back." Alex felt a lump form in his throat, but he didn't let it show. He was determined, even if Mr. Tom didn't believe in him. "She's my mom," he said quietly, looking out the window. "I just need to know why she left." Mr. Tom didn't respond, and the silence returned, heavier this time. Alex could feel the tension in the air, but he refused to give up. This wasn't about Mr. Tom. It was about finding his mother. As the hours passed, the landscape outside the window changed from the familiar small-town streets of Maplewood to wide, open highways and endless fields. They made a few stops along the way, at a gas station where Mr. Tom bought a pack of cigarettes, and at a diner where Alex quietly ate a grilled cheese while Mr. Tom barely touched his food, sipping coffee and staring out the window. At one point, Mr. Tom pulled the truck over on the side of a dusty road to stretch his legs. Alex took the opportunity to climb out as well, breathing in the fresh air and trying to shake off the unease he felt around Mr. Tom. "So you got any idea where she is?" Mr. Tom asked, leaning against the truck and lighting another cigarette. Alex pulled the photograph out of his backpack and showed it to Mr. Tom. "This is her," he said. "I found this picture in the attic. I think the building behind her is a school or something. Maybe that's where she went after she left." Mr. Tom glanced at the photo, squinting at it for a moment before handing it back. "Not much to go on," he muttered, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "But I guess it's a start." They got back into the truck and the journey continued. But now something had shifted. Mr. Tom still wasn't exactly friendly, but he seemed a little less distant. He even asked Alex a few more questions about his mother, what he remembered about her, what the letters had said. The questions weren't warm or caring, but they showed that Mr. Tom was at least taking the trip a bit more seriously. And that was enough for Alex. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Alex felt a flicker of hope. They were heading in the right direction. And even though Mr. Tom wasn't the ideal companion, Alex knew that he wouldn't give up. This was just the beginning of the journey. The days blurred together as Alex and Mr. Tom drove across winding highways and through sleepy towns. The hum of the truck's engine was constant, but the scenery outside changed as they passed fields of wildflowers, quiet forests, and stretches of open plains. For Alex, it felt like they were getting closer to something, even if he wasn't exactly sure what. They had been on the road for 3 days when they reached a small town that wasn't marked on any map. The gas gauge was hovering just above empty, and Mr. Tom grumbled as he pulled into a rickety old gas station. The sign above it read, "Sam's Gas and Snacks" in faded letters, and the station itself looked like it hadn't been touched by time and years. "Fill her up," Mr. Tom said to the young attendant, who appeared from the small office with a tired nod. Alex stepped out of the truck, stretching his legs. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the empty road. As he looked around, something caught his eye, a brightly colored banner fluttering in the breeze. It was stretched across a set of telephone poles and read, "Summer Carnival tonight. Fun for all ages." "Look at that," Alex said, pointing to the banner. "A carnival? Can we go?" Mr. Tom raised an eyebrow, following Alex's gaze to the sign. "A carnival?" he muttered, sounding unamused. "I don't have time for that kind of nonsense." Alex's face fell, but he pressed on. "Please, Mr. Tom, we've been driving for days. It could be fun." Mr. Tom sighed heavily, clearly not interested in the idea. But as he glanced at Alex's hopeful expression, something seemed to shift in him. "All right, fine," he grumbled. "We'll go, but just for an hour. I'm not wasting more time than that." Alex's face lit up with excitement. "Thank you." They paid for the gas, and soon they were headed down a dirt road toward the carnival, the lights from the tents glowing in the distance. As they approached, the sound of laughter and cheerful music filled the air. Bright lights spun from Ferris wheels, and the smell of cotton candy and fried food lingered in the breeze. The carnival was bustling with families, kids running around with balloons, and vendors calling out for people to try their luck at various games. Alex's eyes sparkled as he took it all in. As they walked through the carnival, they stumbled upon an old man dressed in a top hat and a worn velvet jacket. He had a small stage set up in the corner with a sign that read, "Frank the Great Magician Extraordinaire." Frank was in the middle of performing a card trick for a small group of onlookers. His wrinkled face lit up with energy as he worked, flipping cards effortlessly from hand to hand. "Step right up, folks," Frank called out in a dramatic voice. "Witness the impossible, the magical, the fantastic." Alex tugged on Mr. Tom's sleeve. "Can we watch?" Mr. Tom looked like he was about to say no, but instead he shrugged. "Go ahead. I'll be over by the hot dog stand." Alex squeezed through the small crowd and watched, mesmerized as Frank made cards disappear and reappear in the blink of an eye. After the show, Frank approached Alex with a smile, pulling a silver coin from behind his ear. "Gotcha," he said with a wink, handing the coin to Alex. "You've got a good eye for magic, kid." Alex grinned, holding the coin tightly. "That was amazing! How did you do it?" "A magician never reveals his secrets," Frank replied with a chuckle. But remember, magic isn't just tricks. It's about making people believe in something bigger, something beyond what they can see. Alex nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of magic, but also with thoughts of his mother. In a way, finding her felt like trying to believe in something beyond his reach. As Alex thanked Frank and turned to look for Mr. Tom, he noticed a woman standing near the food stands. She was in her 30s, with a friendly smile and short curly hair. She waved at him as if she had noticed him watching. "Hey there," she said, walking over. "Enjoying the carnival?" Alex nodded. "Yeah, it's great. I just watched a magic show." "Sounds fun. I'm Sally, by the way," she said. "I'm traveling for work, but I always try to stop by these small-town carnivals when I get the chance. There's something special about them, don't you think?" Alex nodded, feeling a bit more at ease. "I'm Alex. I'm traveling too. With Mr. Tom," he said, pointing to where Mr. Tom was standing, holding a hot dog and looking as grumpy as ever. Sally chuckled. "Mr. Tom, huh? He doesn't look like the carnival type." Alex laughed. "No, he's not. But he's helping me find my mom." Sally's smile softened. "That sounds like a big journey. You're lucky to have someone with you." Alex glanced at Mr. Tom, who was now staring off into the distance, looking impatient. "Yeah, I guess I am." They talked for a few more minutes, and Sally gave Alex some advice about traveling and staying safe on the road. Then she waved goodbye, disappearing into the crowd. As the night wore on, Alex and Mr. Tom visited a few more attractions. A ring toss game, where Alex managed to win a small stuffed bear, and a Ferris wheel ride, where Mr. Tom refused to join Alex and instead waited below, tapping his foot. By the time they left the carnival, the stars were out, and the cool night air felt refreshing. Alex sat in the truck, clutching the stuffed bear, feeling a strange mix of happiness and sadness. He had enjoyed the carnival, but the thought of his mother was always in the back of his mind. As they drove back to the highway, Mr. Tom broke the silence. "That magician," he said gruffly. "He wasn't half bad." Alex glanced at him, surprised. "You watched?" "Yeah, I watched," Mr. Tom muttered. "It's not every day you see someone pull a rabbit out of a hat." Alex smiled. Maybe Mr. Tom wasn't as cold as he seemed. He thought back to the conversations with Frank and Sally, the way they had treated him with kindness and curiosity. Maybe this journey wasn't just about finding his mother. It was about the people he met along the way. As they continued down the highway, Alex felt the weight of the trip begin to lift. There was still so much unknown, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone. Mr. Tom might be rough around the edges, but Alex could tell that in his own way, he was starting to care. After days of driving, the landscape around them began to shift. The flat roads of the countryside gave way to bustling streets, tall buildings, and the constant hum of a larger city. Alex sat up in his seat, staring out of the truck's window as they entered the city limits. His heart pounded with both excitement and nervousness. This was it, the place where his mother was supposed to be. Mr. Tom glanced over at him, noticing the way Alex's hands fidgeted with the photo of his mother. "You sure this is the right place, kid?" he asked, his voice gruff but a bit softer than usual. Alex nodded. "This is where she was the last time I got a letter from her. She mentioned a place called Horizon Apartments, so I think she used to live there." Mr. Tom grunted in response, guiding the truck through the city traffic. The streets were busy, with cars honking and people rushing across sidewalks. It was a stark contrast to the quiet towns they had passed through earlier. Alex had never seen a city this big before. It felt overwhelming, but at the same time, he felt like they were finally close. It didn't take long to find the address Alex had scribbled down in his notebook. Horizon Apartments was a tall gray building that loomed over a busy intersection. It looked old and worn, with paint peeling from the walls and a cracked sign hanging above the entrance. As they pulled up in front, Alex's stomach twisted with nerves. "This is it," he whispered. Mr. Tom parked the truck and turned off the engine. "All right, kid," he said. "Let's see what we can find." They stepped out of the truck, and Alex could feel the city buzzing around him. He clutched the photograph tightly as they entered the apartment building. Inside, the lobby was small and dimly lit, with faded carpet and an old elevator that creaked as it moved. A woman sat behind a desk, flipping through a magazine, barely looking up as they approached. Alex cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. Excuse me, he said. I'm looking for someone. She used to live here. Her name is Susan. Susan Parker. The woman glanced at him, then at Mr. Tom, her expression bored. Susan Parker? Doesn't ring a bell, she said, flipping another page of her magazine. Lots of people come and go in this place. Alex's heart sank. Are you sure? She lived here a few years ago. The woman sighed, putting down her magazine. Look, kid, I don't keep track of every tenant who's ever lived here, but you can try asking around. Maybe someone in the building remembers her. Alex thanked her, though he felt a wave of disappointment wash over him. Mr. Tom placed a hand on his shoulder. Come on, let's check the rest of the building. They spent the next couple of hours knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they remembered a woman named Susan Parker. Most people shook their heads or gave vague answers. A few mentioned they'd seen someone who might have been her, but none of the details seemed to fit. As the day wore on, Alex's excitement began to fade. The city felt cold and indifferent. With each unanswered door, it became clearer that his mother wasn't here anymore. He tried to hold back the frustration bubbling inside him, but it was hard. At one point, a kind older man named Mr. Davis opened his door and invited them in. He offered them tea and listened patiently as Alex explained his search. The apartment smelled like old books and fresh coffee, and it was the first place that felt somewhat comforting in this big, unfamiliar city. Susan Parker, huh? Mr. Davis said, scratching his chin. The name sounds familiar. I think she lived here for a while. Nice woman, kept to herself mostly. But she moved out. Must have been a few years ago now. Do you know where she went? Alex asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Mr. Davis shook his head. I'm afraid not, son. She didn't talk much about where she was going. But I remember she used to work at a diner down the street. Sonny's Diner, it's called. Maybe someone there knows more. Alex nodded, trying to keep his spirits up. It wasn't much, but it was the first real lead they'd gotten all day. Thank you, Alex said, standing up to leave. Mr. Davis smiled kindly at him. Good luck, kid. I hope you find what you're looking for. With renewed hope, Alex and Mr. Tom made their way to Sonny's Diner, which was just a few blocks away. The diner was small but cozy, with red leather booths and a long counter lined with stools. A bell jingled as they walked through the door. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s, wearing a bright yellow apron, was pouring coffee for a customer. She glanced up as they approached, giving them a welcoming smile. Can I help you folks? She asked. Alex felt his pulse quicken. I'm looking for someone. My mom. Her name's Susan Parker. I was told she might have worked here a few years ago. The woman's smile faded slightly as she thought for a moment. Susan Parker. Yeah, I remember her. Sweet woman. She worked here for about a year. Then she left. I'm sorry, honey. I don't know where she went after that. Alex's shoulders slumped. Did she ever talk about where she was going? The woman shook her head. Not really. She was quiet about her personal life, but she always talked about you. She missed you a lot. You know that? Alex blinked in surprise. She talked about me? Every chance she got, the woman said with a soft smile. She kept a picture of you in her wallet. Told me you were living with your grandma. She was trying to get her life together, I think. She wanted to come back to you when she was ready. Hearing this sent a strange mixture of emotions through Alex. On one hand, he felt a sense of relief knowing that his mother hadn't forgotten him. But on the other hand, it hurt to think she had been so close, yet still so far away. Mr. Tom, who had been standing quietly by, finally spoke. So what now, kid? She ain't here. You want to keep searching? Alex stared down at the counter, feeling the weight of the question. He had come all this way hoping to find his mother, but now it seemed like she had moved on to a place he couldn't follow. A part of him wanted to keep searching, to keep looking until he found her. But another part of him, one that was growing stronger, was starting to wonder if maybe it was time to let go. I don't know, Alex admitted quietly. I just wanted to understand why she left. The woman behind the counter reached out and gently touched his hand. Sometimes people leave because they're lost, sweetheart. It's not always about not loving you. Sometimes they just don't know how to stay. Alex nodded, feeling tears sting the corners of his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. As they left the diner, the city felt different, quieter, less overwhelming. Alex walked beside Mr. Tom, deep in thought. He hadn't found the answers he was looking for, but in a way he had found something else. He had learned more about his mother, about the way she had cared for him, even from afar. And maybe that was enough for now. Mr. Tom glanced at him. "You did good, kid. Takes guts to do what you did." Alex managed a small smile. "Thanks." They didn't say much as they got back in the truck and headed out of the city. The search hadn't ended the way Alex had imagined, but he realized that the journey wasn't just about finding his mother. It was about understanding himself, his family, and the people he had met along the way. The road stretched endlessly ahead as Alex and Mr. Tom began their journey back to Maplewood. The city, with all its noise and unanswered questions, faded in the rearview mirror. Alex stared out the window, his thoughts heavy. He had come so far only to realize that his mother was still beyond his reach, drifting somewhere he couldn't follow. The silence in the truck felt thicker than before, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet shared between two people who had been through something together. Alex clutched the small stuffed bear he had won at the carnival, his mind replaying the stories he had heard about his mother. She had cared about him. She had wanted to come back, but life, it seemed, had a way of pulling people in directions they never expected. Mr. Tom glanced at him from the driver's seat, his brow furrowed as if he was deep in thought. He hadn't said much since they left the diner, but Alex could tell that Mr. Tom wasn't one for words in moments like this. After what felt like hours, Mr. Tom finally spoke, his voice gruff, but gentler than usual. "I know this didn't turn out the way you wanted, kid." Alex didn't respond right away. He didn't know what to say. He had been so sure that finding his mother would give him the answers he had been searching for, but now he wasn't so certain. I thought if I found her, everything would make sense," Alex said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Tom nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes you don't get the answers you're looking for, but that doesn't mean you stop living." Alex blinked, surprised by the wisdom in Mr. Tom's words. He looked over at the older man, seeing him in a new light. Mr. Tom, with all his gruffness and rough edges, had been there for him when no one else could be. Even if he wasn't the ideal travel companion, he had stuck by Alex's side through it all. "Why did you agree to come with me?" Alex asked after a moment. It was a question that had been on his mind since the beginning of their journey. "You didn't have to." Mr. Tom let out a long sigh, his fingers tapping the steering wheel as he thought about his answer. "Your grandma, she's good people. She's helped me more times than I can count. But it wasn't just that." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "I knew what it was like, searching for something. Something you think is missing. I figured I owed it to you to help." Alex's brow furrowed. "You were searching for something?" Mr. Tom didn't respond right away. His jaw clenched slightly, and for a moment Alex thought he wasn't going to answer. But then Mr. Tom spoke again, his voice rough and low. "Yeah, a long time ago. Thought I had it all figured out. Thought I knew what family was supposed to be. Turns out I didn't know a damn thing." Alex watched him, waiting for more. "I lost someone close. And I spent years trying to fill that hole," Mr. Tom continued, his eyes distant as if he was seeing a different time, a different place. "But the thing is, no one can fill it. You just learn to live with it. And sometimes along the way, you find new people. People who help you see that family isn't always about blood. It's about the ones who stick with you, no matter what." Alex felt a lump form in his throat as he listened. He had never heard Mr. Tom talk like this before. The man who seemed so tough and unapproachable had a past, one that echoed Alex's own search for something missing. "I guess I thought if I found my mom, she could fix everything," Alex said softly. "But maybe that's not what I need anymore." Mr. Tom nodded, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Sometimes, kid, the people who care for you the most are the ones who are right in front of you. Your grandma, she raised you, didn't she?" Alex nodded. "Yeah. She didn't have to, but she did. That's what family does. And you got me now too, whether you like it or not," Mr. Tom added with a smirk. Alex smiled for the first time in hours. "I guess I do." The rest of the drive back to Maplewood felt lighter, the weight of disappointment slowly lifting from Alex's shoulders. He hadn't found his mother, but he had found something else, something he hadn't expected. Mr. Tom wasn't the father figure he had imagined, but in his own strange way, he had become a part of Alex's family. The kind of family that wasn't bound by blood, but by the experiences they shared. When they finally pulled into the driveway of Alex's grandmother's house, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the small town. Mrs. Collins was waiting on the porch, her face lighting up with relief as she saw them. "You're home," she called out, rushing over as Alex and Mr. Tom climbed out of the truck. Alex felt a rush of emotion as his grandmother wrapped her arms around him. "I missed you, Grandma," he said, his voice muffled in her embrace. "I missed you too, sweetheart," she replied, her eyes shining with love and concern. She looked over at Mr. Tom, who gave her a small nod. "He did good," Mr. Tom said simply. Mrs. Collins smiled warmly at him. "Thank you, Tom. I knew I could count on you." Mr. Tom shrugged, trying to play it off like it was no big deal. But Alex could see the softness in his eyes. He cared even if he didn't always show it. That night, after a long dinner and catching up with his grandmother, Alex sat outside on the porch, staring up at the stars. The photo of his mother was still in his pocket, but for the first time it didn't feel like a burden. He wasn't carrying it around with the same sense of loss and longing. Instead, it was a part of his story, a story that was still unfolding. Mr. Tom joined him on the porch, sitting down on the steps with a grunt. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies blink in the darkness. "You did a brave thing going after her," Mr. Tom said after a while. "Most kids wouldn't have had the guts." "I don't feel brave," Alex admitted, "but I guess I learned a lot." Mr. Tom smirked. "That's life, kid. You don't always get what you want, but you always get something." Alex smiled at that, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He looked over at Mr. Tom and realized that, despite everything, he wasn't alone anymore. "I'm glad you came with me," Alex said softly. "Thanks, Mr. Tom." Mr. Tom shrugged again, but there was a warmth in his eyes. Yeah. Don't get all mushy on me now." They both chuckled, and for the first time in a long while, Alex felt at home. Not just in the place, but in the people he had around him. Family wasn't just about finding the person you had lost. It was about the ones who were there, right by your side. As the stars twinkled above them, Alex knew that he had found something far more valuable than he had expected. A new kind of family.